Notts County 1, Chesterfield 2. A massive result for the SPIREITES at Meadow Lane on Saturday. We said in Friday's preview of that game that this fixture always tends to throw up some brilliant matches, plenty of drama, and this edition certainly did not disappoint. We're going to get into all of that very, very soon. But just before we do, thank you to anybody who has already supported Friday's preview of this game. In any form, it is always massively appreciated. If you didn't catch that when it came out, and you have got kind of 10 or 15 minutes extra to spare, I would maybe recommend kind of having a flick through it just before we get into this video, just because there's probably some things in there that we flagged up to kind of look out for going into Saturday's game, and we'll kind of revisit them and kind of have a pick through what kind of did or didn't play out, if you like. So if you've got the extra time to spare, just have a flick through that. I would probably recommend it, and of course, selfishly, it would also be an extra bit of support that is massively appreciated. But otherwise, we're going to dive straight in to the kind of look back at the game on Saturday and start with kind of Chesterfield's kind of starting 11 and tactical setup for it. Of course, not many changes kind of expected for this game. Chesterfield on a run kind of back-to-back wins. They start to kind of get a bit more cohesion, a little bit of kind of positive play together. So we weren't expecting too much disruption other than kind of a couple of kind of injury darts that were out there going into this game. Both being kind of in the fullback regions. Of course, Jack Sparks ultimately didn't end up starting, was replaced by Lewis Gordon, and that, unfortunately, that kind of Sparks injury looks like it's going to be a little bit more kind of medium term rather than kind of a short term kind of 1 or 2 game thing. Looks like he's going to be out for around a month if the reports over the last couple of days or so turn out to be accurate, which is a big blow for Chesterfield. Sparks has been brilliant since he joined from Peterborough United on loan in January, but as we'll get into, I'm sure, a little bit later, Lewis Gordon stepped in and had a brilliant game. The other concern heading into Saturday's game was regarding Raheem Chesterfield, and he was ultimately deemed fit enough to start, but unfortunately only around 10 or 15 minutes into the game. The kind of calf issue that looked like it might at one point kind of sideline him completely was unfortunately aggravated, and he had to make way. So kind of only 10 or 15 minutes in, he was ultimately replaced by Janoid Anassi in a change that kind of, as we said on Friday, was the expected one if Chesterfield hadn't been fit, and was ultimately made in the game pretty early on. So that was the 11 for Chesterfield for the majority of the game. And getting into the game itself, this is where we've got to give a pretty significant amount of credit to Notts County. As I think it's fair to say they were probably the better side in the first half, had the majority of the play, and certainly had the majority of the better chances. There were a couple for Chesterfield, the big one falling to Bin Pepper early on, and then another one for Ollie Banks that was saved by Sam Slocum a little bit later as well. But certainly the majority of the play went to Notts County in that first half. And when we spoke about Chesterfield and how they might look to kind of counteract and stop Notts County, we flagged up, well, for both sides really, how many gifted technical players there were, but particularly relevant to this portion of the discussion, how many kind of really good technical players, particularly in those midfield areas or up front and dropping in, or how just across the pitch, really, that Notts County have got. And we spoke about how Chesterfield might look to counteract that, whether they would maybe, particularly since they're not at absolute full strength, look to sit a little bit deeper and prevent access to that midfield area, provide a few more numbers when Notts County did get forward. And that really wasn't necessarily the case. Chesterfield was still pretty much as aggressive as they usually are without the ball, kind of looking to step onto the 3 centre-backs, particularly Manville and Dobra, kind of stepping out alongside Pepple here. And I think that what that did provide for Notts County was that space to work with, and because they have defenders that are comfortable under pressure, able to get the ball forward, they were able to kind of access that midfield area pretty often and pretty comfortably in that first half. And that ultimately, when Chesterfield weren't able to kind of initially win the ball back, would then drag more players out to come and try and fight these midfield battles, and that would then kind of lead to the backline getting stretched and some 1v1 battles across the back four, which Notts County were able to take advantage of and create some pretty good chances in that first half. So definitely I would say that as things reached half time, that Notts County could, I think, find themselves a little bit unfortunate not to be 1 or 2 goals up going into the break, but Chesterfield did kind of fight their way through to half time. Call it luck if you must, but I actually think there's some decent credit due, particularly to Ryan Boot in goal. One very big save from Alassane Jatta, a couple of other decent ones as well, and also some very handy defensive work from this defensive unit. At times as well, they did well to kind of ride through that storm, survive that pressure, get themselves through to half time, kind of a reset point in the game, and certainly it was in this game, because Chesterfield started from the start of the second half onwards to start to get a bit more of a grip on the game. That's not to say that they went down the other end and were immediately banging on the door of Notts County, but they were slowly, gradually creeping their way forward, starting to get a bit more pressure, starting to kind of return some punches. And eventually, that would manifest itself in the opening goal for Bim Peppel. And not to, again, I know I've kind of mentioned the preview a few times, hark back to it a little bit. But as we spoke about in the build-up to this game, this was kind of the archetypal goal that you thought Chesterfield might be able to get themselves with the system that they're playing and in this game. With that narrow front three, it was always going to be a necessity and a big task for Janoy Donatian, and more relevantly in this example, Lewis Gordon, to get up on the overlap. And that's exactly what we saw for the opening goal. Gordon getting himself up here. Some nice play with Armando Dobra on the left. And yeah, with that narrow three, it was always going to be important to get those players on the overlap, to provide the Donatian as well, hanging that little bit further back. And actually, as the ball comes in, there's actually Ollie Banks, who's been involved in that move, dropped a little bit deeper. So Tom Naylor had got himself up there, and you had the bodies in and around the box, ready for that ball to come in. And of course, Bim Peppel absolutely ready to make that dash into the 6-yard box and provide the header. So very, very good play from Chesterfield for that goal, and exactly what you want to see from them when they're playing this front three, when they're playing in a game like this, pretty much exactly as you would have scripted it, really, with that ball hung up there for Bim Peppel. And we all know with the kind of the build and physicality that he's got, that if you put the ball up for him like that he's always going to have half a chance. Did very well actually to get the jump, to craft the space on the centre back that was marking him, and then header relatively simple, but it wouldn't have been simple without the movement from Peppel and the ball from Gordon to create it. So very, very good stuff here from Chesterfield, and very, very good stuff, I thought, particularly for two players that are still working their way back from some injury issues, from Lewis Gordon and Janoy Donatian. We flagged that up as one of the big battle points. Who was going to prevail in that battle out wide? Would it be Notts County's wing backs? Would it be Chesterfield's full backs? And I wouldn't say it was a decisive win for Chesterfield's fullbacks, but they definitely more than held their own and then picked their moment, particularly Gordon, of course, picking his moment to have a very, very big impact on the game and get himself an assist. Unfortunately, was ultimately forced off with cramp pretty much immediately after this goal, which was a real shame, but hopefully you would think that not too serious, and particularly with Jack Sparks out, you would like to think he'll be able to play a role. But unfortunately, that was the end of his afternoon, and he was replaced by Dylan Duffy pretty much immediately after that goal. And yeah, a good job done on the whole from Gordon and Donatian and kind of that whole defensive unit across the game. Now, when you're kind of panning forward to the equalising goal, it wasn't necessarily a breakdown there, really. It was more just kind of a bit of a kind of spontaneous, bit of a fluke moment in the game, really. That's not to discredit the goal for Notts County. Some very nice work in there, but it was actually Chesterfield's counter-attack. They got themselves forward. Naylor and Dobra, it was the two that were leading that counter-attack. Dobra kind of, I think it was either a blocked pass out from the back from Notts, or Dobra won the ball, basically, burst in behind, and then Naylor got up kind of on the outside of him. Dobra laid it off, and Naylor chose to shoot. Now, if he puts that in the top corner, it's a brilliant goal, it's a brilliant counter-attack. It's 2-0 Chesterfield, it's potentially game over, and it's high fives all round. Obviously, hindsight dictates that it necessarily wasn't the best decision, and essentially that was because it was a bit of bit of a counter-attack and a counter-attack, if you like. So when Sam Slocum was able to bowl the ball out quickly, Chesterfield weren't in that kind of shape to get players back at all. Duffy was kind of in a more advanced spot, so it meant Mandeville got dragged over to try and cover this wide area. Jamie Grimes then went over to try and help him, and this all meant that when Notts were able to work the ball through, and then when the kind of initial ball was cleared, kind of half cleared by Ash Palmer, that Chesterfield just didn't have the kind of defensive numbers on the edge of the box, that defensive shield to then clear the second ball away. It fell on the edge of the box, and Notts County were able to score. So frustrating for Chesterfield, absolutely, but it wasn't necessarily kind of a breakdown of the system as such. It was kind of one of the, like I say, one of those more spontaneous counter-attacking moments, which with a little bit of maybe better decision making, if you like, could definitely have been prevented, and a lot easier to prevent than like an underlying kind of tactical flaw. Nonetheless, at that point, it was of course Notts County 1, Chesterfield 1. And there was a little bit of a feeling, yeah, you could sense it in the away end of, here we go again against Notts County. Of course, Notts County pegging them back twice before ultimately going on to win on penalties in the National League promotion final a couple of seasons ago. And then in the reverse fixture of this game, Notts County scoring in stoppage time from the rebound off a penalty to again secure a 2-2 draw and a share of the points. And there was that feeling of, is it going to happen again? But the answer was no. Chesterfield were going to win on this occasion, and it was that man Tom Naylor atoning a little bit for what you might say was a poor decision by getting himself on the score sheet. And overall, I thought it was a brilliant game from him, pretty much back to his best in the way he could influence games. Kind of getting in there, particularly in the first half, where yes, Chesterfield were struggling in the midfield battle, but there were times when he would just get a foot in there or win that kind of get himself between the ball to win a foul and kind of relieve the pressure, big moments. And then I think in the second half we saw kind of the same from Jensen Metcalf as well, and I think yes, they were. It was a struggle in that midfield area for Chesterfield in the first half, but I thought those two really played a significant role in the game. Again, in another one of those key battle areas, they made sure that, yes, they bent a little bit in the first half, but they did not break, and they really kind of grew into their own as the game went on. Metcalf especially, and then of course Naylor have really grown into the game with the ultimately decisive moment, picking again his moment to get forward and make it 2-1, and kind of a very similar kind of goal to the first one, really, in kind of how important it was to get those bodies around Ben Pepple, because the ball actually does come in to him initially. I think it's Duffy who's kind of slightly in a kind of narrower area, with Ryan Colclough having come on as a substitute. Puts the ball in. Pepple manages to get himself there ahead of the defender, but his kind of shot or touch or whatever it was gets blocked, but it's Naylor there again. Bodies around Pepple, those narrow three, or the players that are stepping up into that three with other players then dropping back and covering, getting those midfield players in and around Pepple, because he is such an asset. If you bank on him getting himself in there, whether it's to get the shot off or get himself in there to lay it off, if you get the bodies around him, things are going to happen. It did happen. It fell back to Naylor. He put it in. It was 2-1 Chesterfield, and that was largely that. So what are the closing thoughts from this game? And I think it almost goes without saying that this is a very impressive afternoon for Chesterfield. Yes, again, they did have to absorb some pressure, and maybe you could say we're a little bit fortunate not to be a goal or two down after that first half. But considering the fact that they're still without quite a few players that you would consider to be key, or at least useful squad players at the moment, the fact that it's a very tough place to go, Notts County, a very strong team, and it's a game that Chesterfield have not necessarily ended up on the right side of in recent seasons. To go and get 3 points is a significant achievement. Now, of course, this is just a league game. I don't think it goes any way to completely wiping out or eclipsing, if that's even possible, that the heartbreak of that playoff defeat a couple of seasons ago. But you could tell by the reaction full time of some of the players that played in that game: Liam Mandeville, Ollie Banks, Armando Dobra, and even Chesterfield's assistant manager Danny Webb, that meant a lot to finally get one over on a team that seemed to have had their number and handed out quite a few moments of pain to them over the past few seasons to get to finally have one land the other direction. I think it meant a lot, and it was a bit of weight off the shoulders in that regard. And could having such a moment like that, such a moment of release of that late Tom Naylor goal, could that provide the stepping stone now for Chesterfield to go on and make that dash for the playoffs once again, and maybe have a happier ending of the playoffs this time around? Of course, a lot of work to do. It's not a given that they're going to win these games. Yes, they have a favourable run in. I think it's 7 of the 10 teams they play now are below them in the League Two table. It's certainly more favourable than it could be, but it's certainly not a given. Of course, they lost to Harrogate Town, their next opponent. They lost that reverse game. They lost 3-0 at home to Accrington Stanley. They needed a last-minute winner to beat Barrow. They lost at Gillingham earlier in the season, albeit when the Gills were going a little bit better towards the start of the season. So nothing is a given. It's still going to take a big, big effort for Chesterfield to make those playoffs, but it's certainly a lot more likely now they've won this than it would have been. So a very big afternoon for Chesterfield, a big result for them. And it's going to be a fun journey, I think, these last 10 games of the season. And I'm looking forward to going on it with you right here on this channel. Hopefully, starting with a preview of that Harrogate game a little bit later in the week, probably on Friday. I like to wait kind of just for those last few minutes of, last few bits rather, of pre-match information to come out to give the kind of most full and informed preview possible. But in terms of this video, that is it. Thank you very, very much for watching. As always, if you've enjoyed it, any support would be massively appreciated. Likes, subscriptions, and all that good stuff. And as I say, we'll hopefully see you a bit later in the week for a preview of that Harrogate Town game. But otherwise, that is it for this video. So thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.